everyone. Like he said, my name is Ben Ilegbodu. I'm here to talk about React and ES Next, my two favorite features, things I like to build with. I want to let you know that I've posted a link to my slides on my Twitter account at BenMVP. So if you want to check that out or go to my blog, benmvp.com, you can have the slides there. Because I won't have enough time to kind of camp on certain topics that I'm going to talk about. I'm going to go over them at a high level and explain them, but you may want to dive deeper and focus a little bit more on those. So if you have the slides, I just want to let you know that you will have the slides to take a look at to peruse later. All right, so the first thing I want to do is I actually want to get everyone to stand up. I want to get everyone in the room to stand up. Apparently we have 2,500 people on the live stream, so I want you guys to stand up too, watching. If you're, got your headphones on at work and pretending like you're working and you're not, I want you to still stand up. Go ahead. Because we've been sitting here for a whole hour, we need to get loose. So what I want us to do all together is we're going to do 10 squats like this, okay? Together, right? We're going to do it in unison. So if you're physically unable, don't feel at all self-conscious, but we're all going to just get those major muscle groups worked up so the blood can start flowing, okay? You ready? Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Yes, you look silly. 4, 5, 6. Feeling the burn now. 7, 8, 9, and 10. All right, good job, guys. Well, but before you sit down, I want you to turn to your neighbor, introduce yourself, and say hello really quickly, okay? All right, now you may have a seat. Go ahead and have a seat for me, please. Great. So now you have all introduced yourself. Let me introduce myself. Like I said, my name is Ben Ilegbodu. I'm a Christian, I'm a husband, and a father. This is my wife, Rashida. We've been married for about 6.5 years. We have 2 daughters, Simone and Avery. Simone turned 3 last Thursday, and Avery is 6 months old now. This picture is from when she was a month old, so it's pretty old now. But we live in Pittsburgh, California, so if you're from the Bay Area, that's far out in the East Bay. And I currently work at Eventbrite. So I am the manager of our front-end platform team, and we've been spending the last year or so transitioning our JavaScript stack from Backbone over to React. Yeah, I know. I'm clapping inside too. There are a lot of things that we had to ramp up the team with on React on ES6. So a lot of what I'm talking about comes out of that exercise as well. And the last thing is that I'm a huge basketball fan. I love playing basketball, I love watching basketball, and I'm originally from Houston, so the Houston Rockets. Who was a Houston Rockets fan? Yes, Houston Rockets are my team. And now with the Warriors, hobbled and Spurs hobbled, this is our season. You heard it right here at React Conference, that the Rockets are going all the way, okay? I'm really hoping there's somebody on the live stream like jumping up from Houston like, yes! But anyway, you didn't want to hear about me. You came to hear about React and how we can use ES Next to make it awesome. So here's the agenda. I'm just going to talk about these 5 things. I picked these 5 things because I think that you'll be able to leverage them in your applications now to make your code clearer and more concise. And I also think that the 5 things kind of run the gamut of expertise. So hopefully there will be something that everybody here, whether you're just getting started or you've been developing for a long time, that it can apply to you. All right, so just to frame the code that we're going to be talking about and looking at, here's the original React tutorial before they changed it to a tic-tac-toe app. We had basically a to-do app that was masquerading as a comment app. So at the bottom, you would input your information in a form, and then at the top, it would list all of your comments. So the comments were listed in state in the top level app. So just kind of keep this in mind in your head when we're looking at the code. But what we're going to be focusing on is just this code right here. Don't worry about understanding it completely. Essentially, it's the main logic of the top level app. It takes the comment that was just submitted by the form, and it adds it to the state, and then makes an AJAX request so that it can go to the back end. And then finally, the back end gives the new list of comments that then will get set to the state. All right? So let's jump in. The first thing I want to look at is the first line of the code right here. So what we're doing is taking a prop out of state called comments, like I mentioned, and we are assigning it to a variable called comments. And there is some duplication going on here because the name of the prop is the same as the name of the variable. So what we can do is use something called destructuring to make it a little less repetitive. And I have a link here to my blog post where I wrote all kinds of things about destructuring, more than I can talk about today, but I just wanted to point that out. I also want to point out that if you're unfamiliar with destructuring, I just want to give you a heads up. You may feel this way about me, okay? Because the syntax is very, very gnarly, I would say, if you're unfamiliar with it. But I promise as you use it more and use it more, you're actually going to feel this way about destructuring, okay? I promise. I want you to tweet me when you feel this way about it, okay? So this is what it looks like. What we have is an object literal pattern that's on the left-hand side of the assignment, and it kind of dictates how the property, the object on the right, should be assigned to variables. So we're creating a variable called comments, and we're pulling a property out of state, also called comments, and doing the assignment. And this is what's called object destructuring. So on the surface, this doesn't look like much of an improvement. So let me show you actually some code further in another part of the app, in the comment form, that kind of really shows the power of destructuring. So we have two properties in state, author and text, right? And we want to declare two variables and assign those variables from those properties. So what the destructuring pattern shows there is it's saying there's a property in state called author, and I want to declare a variable of the same name, author, and then make an assignment to that. And similarly, there's a property called text in state, and I want to declare a variable called text and then make that assignment. So it now allows us to collapse multiple different statements into one single statement. And if you have some variables that you want to name that are named different than the properties in the state, you can do that as well, as the bottom example shows. So let's say we wanted author name and full text instead of author and text. Well, we use what's called the long form pattern of the object destructuring. And what it's saying is that there's a property called author in that state. That's what's before the colon. And we want to declare a variable called author name that's after the colon. Make that assignment, and then now you have author name with that value. Similarly, there's a property called text, declare a variable called full text, and make that assignment. So it's exactly what the code was doing before, but it's a nice shorthand syntax so that you can smash multiple statements into a single statement. But we can take this a step further and move that object destructuring pattern into the function header to kind of simulate named parameters. So as you're familiar, you can create a stateless function, and that stateless function takes in the props that were defined when you had your JSX. So at the bottom there, we have the my component JSX. It has style equals dark as one of the properties, and then stateless func as a children property. So up above, we have our stateless function, and it takes in props. So in that before example, we see we have props as a parameter, and we do props.style and props.children in the code. But if we do destructuring in the function header, then we can have children and style immediately available as parameters and use those as variables inside of the function. So now the my component stateless function immediately declares that all it's going to be using is style and children. And it's very clear to the code as what it's going to do. And you can use this destructuring in the function header in stateless functions as well as any other function that you describe. So it helps your function be more declarative as to what properties it's going to use in an object instead of having to search inside of the code to figure out what properties are going to be used. So that's destructuring. We showed object destructuring. The next thing I want to take a look at are the next 3 lines in the code. And essentially what they're trying to do is get the comment, add an ID to it because the comment needs a unique ID, and then take that comment, add it to the end of the list of comments, and then further down set that state. And we want to do this in a way that doesn't mutate comments and doesn't mutate comments. But actually, if you look at the code, when we assign comment to new comment, we're just making an assignment. We're actually not making a copy. So when we do new comment.id, we're actually mutating both new comment and comment because they're the exact same reference. So that's a bug in the code as it stands. And then further down, we're using comments.concat, which basically takes the new comment object, sticks it, makes a copy of comments, and then sticks it on the end of that. So there's a new syntax in ES6 that we can use to kind of do the same code and do the same thing in a little bit less code. And that's called using the spread operator. So the spread operator are 3 dots that you will put before an object, and it will spread its contents into an array or into an object. So this is what the new code looks like in order to maintain immutability. So to create the new comment object, what we do is we spread all of the properties that are in comment in a new object literal that we're creating, and then add the ID in there, in the object. So now we have a cloned version of comment as well as it has the ID property. And then similarly, for new comments, we have an array. We're taking the comments and spreading its values into a new array, and then adding new comment into that. So if this is our first time seeing spread operator, this may not make complete sense. So let me take you down a path to hopefully explain it a little bit better. So if you're using math.max, right, you can pass 1 or more values to math.max, and it'll give you back the max that was passed in. So if you did math.max 33, 2, 9, you would get back 33. But if you had an array that you wanted to get the max of, you'd have to do the code that you see at the bottom there that did math.max.apply and then pass a null context and then the array of values. And I don't want to go into how that works, but you have to do some, you have to be a JavaScript ninja, so to speak, in order to know how to do those kind of things. Well, what the spread operator does is it takes that array of 33, 2, 9, that array of 3 elements, and it spreads each element of the array as if you called math.max with the 3 individual parameters. So it took the array and spread each element into different parameters in the function call to math.max. So now it's as if you called math.max 33, 2, 9. That's what the spread operator does. It takes an array into individual parameters in a function call. So then, if we remind ourselves of how you could create an array. So the old school way of creating an array is using the array constructor. New array 2, 3, 4. But pretty much no one does that anymore. We use the shorthand notation, which is the bracket syntax. So we'll just say bracket 2, 3, 4 to create an array. But as you know, a constructor is just a fancy form of a function. And remember, the spread operator works with function calls. So if we look below, when we're creating the new array of 1, spreading values, and then 5, we're creating a new array that has those 5 elements in it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because we have 1, spread 2, 3, and 4 as if they're individual parameter calls, and then 5 as the last one. So now when we do the bracket notation and do 1, and then spread values 2, 3, 4, and then 5, we now have an array of 5 values. So that's how we can actually clone an array easily with the spread operator. So that was the spread operator with arrays. There's also a proposal to do it with objects. So this is not ES6 or ES 2015. This is not 2016 or even 2017 that's coming out later this year. This is a proposal that's in stage 3, so more than likely it's going to be in ES 2018 next year. But what you can do is if you have an object, let's say you have a list of Warriors players, and those Warriors players are Steph, Clay, and Draymond with their ratings that I gave them all. And then you add Kevin Durant to the team, right? And you want to create a new object that has the new set of Warriors. You don't want to add Kevin to the old set of Warriors. You want to create a new object that has the new set. So you spread the Warriors object into the new object that you're creating, and then you add Kevin to the end of it. So now New Warriors has those 4 players. Warriors just has the original 3 players in it. And this is a feature, like I said, in stage 3 that's coming out hopefully next year. But if you use Babel and you use stage 3 transpilation, you'll have that to use right now. So now, this is our code. Now that we know how the spread operator works, we've got those ability to create new comments, to create the new comments variable, and use immutability. Okay, so now we've done the initializations, we've got that kind of sorted out with ES Next. Let's tackle the API request, the AJAX request at the bottom of the code. So we're using function bind in order to pass this context into the function. And that's because if you didn't do that, this would be undefined or would be the window object, depending on if you were in strict mode or not. So ES6 introduces arrow functions. And arrow functions allow you to replace any anonymous function with an arrow function. And arrow functions now work as you expect. You no longer have to use the function bind to pass into this context. This context inside of the arrow function is the same as it is outside of the arrow function. So it doesn't depend on how the function was called. It depends on where the function was declared. So now this inside is what you would expect it to be. But arrow functions not only have proper this context, they're also just shorter syntax. So we get rid of the function keyword, and we replace it with literally an arrow, a fat arrow. So an equal sign greater than, that's in between the parameters and the function body. And arrow functions come in a lot of different permutations, if you're unaware yet. If you have one parameter in your function, in your arrow function, you can omit the parentheses around it. And similarly, if you have one statement that returns a value, then you can omit the curly braces. So in that top example, when I'm using map, I don't have parentheses or curly braces. I actually have something that's really shorthand notation, really concise. And then in the end, squares is going to be 1, 4, and 9. But if I have 0 parameters, or if I have more than one parameter, then I need to use the parentheses around those parameters, as you see in the second example. And then if I have one statement that's not going to return a value, like in the alert user function, or I have multiple statements, then I need to put those around curly braces. So there's kind of 4 different combinations you can use of arrow functions depending on what they're going to do. But I also want to point you to the last example, number 5, which was our stateless function from before. I've now rewritten it as a const arrow function. And that const arrow function is also still using destructuring in the function header. So now, as you can see, you can combine different ES6 functionality together. And I want you to pay attention to that const arrow function because we're going to be using it again and also going to be looking at destructuring in a arrow function as well. Okay, so we've talked about destructuring, we've talked about spread operator, talked about arrow functions. I want to take it up a level, okay? Ha 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 ha. Yeah, you get it. Okay, so we have the AJAX function. We made the arrow functions, but using the arrow functions in general with the callback style programming is kind of annoying, right? And it's kind of 2013 type programming, I would say. And there has to be something better than using AJAX in our React code, right? Or sorry, using jQuery in our React code. Because jQuery has all this code that comes with it, and if all we're using AJAX for is, it's going to be kind of inefficient. Plus, if you have jQuery in your code, you're more than likely to abuse jQuery in your React code and use refs because you have jQuery to be able to manipulate the DOM. So we want something that's a little bit better to replace Ajax, as well as kind of replace this callback style system that we're using. And ES6 introduces something called promises. So no longer do we do callback style programming, we were going to use promises. And the way that we're able to do that is with this new API called fetch that's been introduced to all of our modern browsers. So window.fetch now is promise-based, so it's a replacement of XML HTTP request object. And basically you pass the first parameter to fetch, is the URL that you want to fetch, and the second parameter is an optional set of options for that request. So here I'm passing in the method as post and passing in the body as the content of the comment for fetch. And what fetch gives me back is now a promise object. And on that object, it will be resolved when the asynchronous action is done, when I get back the data. And I can use then in order to get out that data. So here I'm using the then reaction. I get back the response stream, and then I convert that stream into a JSON by doing .json method on it. And .json returns another promise, so then I can now chain my promise, and instead of assigning it to a variable, just chain it and do another then. And now with the response JSON, I can set that to state. And the nice thing about promises is that it also has catch. And catch catches any error that happened up the promise chain. So if the fetch failed, if the JSON serial parsing failed, if setting state for some reason failed, all of those errors would be caught in that last catch, and then we would write it out to the console. So promises are basically the future of asynchronous programming. Any API moving forward that is asynchronous is going to use promises instead of using callbacks. And that's because promises are more flexible. And here I'm kind of showing how they are more flexible. So typically in your application code, when you're developing your helper libraries, you're going to create a fetch JSON function that's going to wrap fetch and also serialize or parse into JSON. And that's going to return you back a promise. But then now you can have another function, in this case fetch comments, that's a wrapper around that just passes the right URL that you want to use, API comments. And all fetch comments does is just return back the promise that fetch JSON returns. So now in the meat of your actual function, get unique comment authors, you can use that promise. So you're able to just pass the promise all the way down into different functions and kind of separate out your logic into different discrete units. So now fetch unique comment authors, calls fetch comments, gets that promise back, does a then on it to get the comments out, because it's the JSON, and then does a map over it to convert the array of objects into an array of authors, so author strings, using that map and using destructuring there in the function header. So now we have the array of comments that were returned. The thing about promises is that if you return, whatever is returned inside of a promise, then reaction gets converted into a promise. It gets wrapped together. So now, when I do another then, I now have authors as the parameter that's in the then. And then I'm just doing low-unique to make sure that they're all unique. And now get unique comments returns back a promise that has the unique authors. So at the bottom of the code, I'm now using that data in order to set it to state. And in this example, I'm also using object literal shorthand, which I didn't have time to talk about, but it's something that it also comes with ES6. So this is kind of like the power of promises and what they enable you to do, to be able to pass them around so that at any point you have an object that then, when it's resolved, you can get the data out of it. But you're not just, you don't only have to use promises with APIs that are promise-based. You can actually convert callback-style functions into promises. So here I've wrapped set timeout with a promise constructor so that when set timeout gets called, the promise will be resolved. So I've basically created a promise-based sleep function in JavaScript. So now I can wait 3 seconds and then call get comment authors and then get the data outside and set state on it. Also, I can use this for Node. So for the file system object in Node, if you're familiar, the read file function and other files, you get back a callback, and the first parameter in that callback is an error, and if that doesn't have anything in it, then you know the second parameter has the data that you can use. Well, that's kind of clunky to use, and it's proliferated all over Node. But now you can wrap that in a promise in the same way, and now have a promise-based read file. So then you do read file the path that you want, then you get the data, catch, you handle the error. So now there's a predefined format API for handling successes and errors instead of having that function that may pass the first parameter as an error or not. Like now everyone can kind of adhere to the same standard of how to pass data and successes and how to pass failures. And I would argue that this is a friendlier syntax to use for handling file system methods. And then lastly with promises, I also wanted to show promise.all, which is a new function, and it allows you to take an array of promises, asynchronous actions, and then get back a single promise that will be resolved when all of those other ones have finally resolved. So they can all happen at different times, and then the one promise you get back will be resolved when they all have. So what this now allows you to do is you can submit in parallel all of these actions. So fetch the comments, fetch the posts, fetch the users, and those can all take different amounts of time. And then once they are all done, or one fails, then you'll get back a promise that will be resolved. So trying to manage this in the callback style programming is very difficult to kind of manage what all of them are doing. So then what you get back in your promise is an array of the data that those individual promises would have returned. And then what I'm doing now is that's in responses. And then I'm using array destructuring as opposed to object destructuring to get back those individual values. So I get back the comments, I get back the posts, I get the users, and then now I have those data to do whatever I want. And in this example, I'm just setting them to state. But it allows you to do parallel programming very easy with promises. So that is the power of promises. And you can do a lot with promises. And because of the way that they're set up, you never have the kind of pyramid of doom or callback hell, because everything is a flat promise chain. Where you do one work in a reaction, and then that becomes a chained promise that comes in. So everything is really flat. But the problem still is that once you go to asynchronous programming style, you can never go back, right? Once you go async, you can never go back. So it's still kind of annoying. It's still, it's better than callback style, but still a struggle. So what we really want to do is be able to write the same way with synchronous programming as we do with asynchronous programming. And a feature that's coming now in ES 2017, officially this year, are async functions. And you can use normal control flow with the async keyword and the await keyword. And this is what our code now looks like with synchronous code. So the first thing you have to do is name your method or your function async. Use the async keyword ahead of it. So that's the first thing. And then now you have the await keyword. And the await keyword works with promises, any kind of promises. And it will just hold your code until that promise is resolved. So here, now our code will wait at the await fetch and wait for the response to come back. And then once the asynchronous thing has happened, we now have the response stream in our variable. So we can just assign it directly. We don't have to use any kind of callbacks or anything like that. And then now we have that response stream, .json to convert it to JSON, or .blob for an image, or .text for text. They all return back a new promise to serialize the stream into whatever you want. So now we have to await that as well. So now that's assigned into new comments, just directly in there. And then at the end, we set the state, and we have those values. And the reason I've wrapped it in a try-catch is because that's how we handle exceptions in our normal code. We use a try-catch statement instead of having to use a catch reaction in promises or check to see if some variable named error exists. So in the catch, any of the promises fail, the catch will handle it, and then you can do whatever you want to handle the errors with that. So how does this all work in ES 2017? Well, it's if you look at how it's implemented, what Babel does with the regenerator runtime and with how it changes async into what it transpiles it to, it's basically magic. It's like lines and lines and lines of code to support it. But in reality, what it is, async functions are a combination of generators, which I didn't talk about, and the usability of promises coming together to give you asynchronous code written like it's synchronous code. So I wanted to show some fun with async before I get off. So here's a constant function, arrow function I'm calling fun with async. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm awaiting get unique common authors, and then I have that value. Then I'm awaiting that sleep function. Remember, it's a wrapper around set timeout, and I just wait 1.5 seconds, just cause, right? And then I'm awaiting read file of my package.json file, and I get that value back, and then I do json.parse, so now I have it as my package info. And then I'm gonna sleep another 3 seconds, wait another 3 seconds, and then await the promise.all, because promise.all returns a promise, and then now I have all of those values that were all done in parallel, right? But then I have them synchronously as a value, and then use the structuring in order to get those individual values. So I just made 5 different asynchronous calls, get unique authors, read the file, and then the 3 parallel files, did them all in code that looks synchronous, right? And then at the end, I'm returning 42, just cause, right? But what happens is that an async function, when you return a value, that value gets wrapped in a promise so that something else that was using fun with async can then await the value that's returned back from it. So you can kind of keep having your synchronous functions using together. So hopefully you're feeling this way about asynchronous functions, because this is how I felt the first time I saw them. It's like, wow, all of my helper code that I'm writing along with React, I can now just use synchronous codes. All my libraries that are doing asynchronous code, it's just written synchronously, and it's just amazing, an amazing way to write. So this is what we had before, again, and this is what it gets converted into afterwards. So it's a little bit less code, but I would say that it's more declarative, more clear as to what it's doing, and it's all synchronous code instead of having to be all written synchronously, even though it has some async properties in it. So I created a repo that goes through all of these things step by step. I only showed 5 of the steps, but there are more steps in terms of going from ES5 all the way to this ES next. So there's a repo if you're interested in learning more about modules and classes and block scoping, stuff I just glossed over and skipped over. You can go to this repo and follow the steps as well. So you can see a working app go from ES5 all the way to the end. There are 9 steps in total. And also have additional resources that you can read up on. So I have a whole blog series on ES6. Axel Roschmeyer wrote this great chapter in his book about async functions that you can read. And then lastly, Eventbrite, we have a whole bunch of people writing a lot of React, a lot of ES Next, and we want some cohesion amongst that code. So we wrote style guides on how to do both. So if you're interested in kind of best practices, or at least the practices that we've adopted, I would suggest you take a look at those links as well. All right, so at the end, I like to always kind of thank people in my talks. So first, I want to thank React Conf for having me, and also for obviously putting on the conference as well. So I want to thank Tom and Beth for inviting me. 2 years ago, I had never even heard of React, and last year, it was just my dream to come to React Conf. I bet I didn't get in, right? But now here I'm speaking on stage and be able to share what I've learned about React, what I've learned about ES Next with you. So that's a great privilege for me to be able to be here. Secondly, I want to thank Eventbrite for allowing our team to be able to make that conversion from Backbone to React so that we can improve our code base, improve our development experience with React so that I could learn all these things and then be able to share with you. And they've all been really supportive of me coming and speaking at different places, so I'm thankful for that. And then lastly, thankful for all of you for being here, for listening in. Granted, it's a single track, so you had nowhere else to be but here, right? But you're still here and not going, trying to get in front of the lunch line, so that I'm really appreciative of as well. So thank you very much, everyone.